Welcome to this special edition of Henriksen and Selle, a Norwegian podcast that for the first time, because of our special guest, is going to be sending it in English. And I hope you enjoy this podcast because we have an amazing woman that's a voice to be reckoned, a voice to listen to. And she has an amazing website I want you all to visit when this podcast is over. So, my name is Tom Henriksen, and my co-host, as always, is the leader of the Conservative Party in Norway, Mr. Erik Selle. Welcome, Erik.
Thank you.
And our amazing guest today is Hanne Nabintu Herland from Herland Report. Welcome, Hanne.
Thank you.
So, just to kick it off, tell us a little bit your website and your new book. Everybody should buy the book, by the way.
Well, I'm the founder and leader of the Herland Report. I'm also a commentator at the WND in the United States, and I'm a best-selling author, Scandinavian author. My website also has a number of interviews with leading Western intellectuals that you can find on YouTube. But log into the Herland Report, and from there you can find a lot of interesting topics that kind of explain some other sides to what we normally find and read in the mainstream media, which is basically the point. I was born and raised in Africa, and ever since I moved back to Europe many years ago, I understood that Europe lives in its own little bubble, behind somewhat an iron wall. We used to laugh at the Soviets, and back in the day when we said they live behind an iron wall. Their media is propaganda media, and they're not told the whole truth about the West. I think that similarly, we do have the same situation in Europe today, and it's been ongoing for many, many years, that we have an almost solely socialist media, Marxist media, that turns all kinds of pieces of information into mainstream media that then again is completely biased. So I understood that since I came from Africa, I saw that very clearly. So that has been my project, is to bring some elements into the newsroom, elements that are conservative, that see things from another point of view. And I'm a big Trump fan, so that's to say I have a book on Trump, The Battle for America. And you asked about my latest book, is a best-selling on Amazon. The name is The Billionaire World, How Marxism is Used by the Elites.
Great. Hanne, we had a very interesting conversation a week ago in a Norwegian program. So we decided to bring this to a bigger audience globally. And I see Tom is putting up Vice President Vance's speech in Munich. And let's start there. What would you say is the biggest difference of the direction that America is now taking and the direction that Europe seems to sink into?
This is a completely new era in international relations. And with the entry of President Donald Trump, we saw a dramatic change in the United States, going from an almost communist ideology under Obama and continuing under Biden, until Trump came and we had a complete change into the conservatism. And this is very, very dramatic. And we have been following it for a number of years, the processes in the United States. But so when the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, came to the security conference in Munich, in Germany, just a few days ago, a couple of weeks ago, actually, and held his speech, he performed a frontal attack on the socialist systems and the lack of freedom, the lack of freedom of speech in Europe, and the totalitarian sway that we have seen in Europe the past years, but actually has been ongoing for a very long time. So the shock couldn't have been greater in Europe, and we're in the middle of a big, massive paradigm change of narrative at this very moment, with total chaos in the EU. So that's the situation, and of course J.D. Vance, I've written about it both at VND and also at Herland Report, done the analysis of that speech. I kind of find that the conservatism that is now entering the stage in the United States, what is conservatism? What is classic conservatism? It is one, belief in the nation state, belief in that politicians in a nation should defend the nation and its citizens. They have national borders. That is the classical view, the conservative view, going all the way back to Westphalia Peace in the 1600s, which ended the 100 Years' War in Europe, by the way. There was so much stress in Europe at the time, and there was war. There were wars between France and England and all over the place for so many years. And all those wars ended when the Westphalia Peace was formed in the 1600s. And the Westphalia Peace, the central element there was, we need to have respect for national boundaries, because the French do like a different wine. They like to produce their wine differently than the British. And the British like their pubs to be different than the French. We are different nations with different languages. We need to establish some kind of system that respects each nation's right to have sovereignty within its own state. So these are the conservative principles that the United States now is putting in place. One may add freedom of speech, for example, the belief in liberty, the belief in individual liberty with responsibility, the belief that individuals should be responsible for their actions. And now if we go versus the EU socialist system, it is a dramatically different system. The EU was formed after World War II. Everybody knows that. I often say that the EU represents a regional socialism. We know that national socialism failed in Germany in the world post-World War II. Everybody acknowledged national socialism has failed. But please remember, socialism was extremely popular all over Europe at the time. There was the development for the welfare state in the UK. I mean, the socialist thoughts were mainstream. And as the EU was formed in the early 1950s, they hoped that some sort of a regional socialism would unify Europe, and that we would no longer experience wars the way we did in the World War II. Now, the problem, maybe the main problem with socialism, is that it is a totalitarian system that administers, or it borders on totalitarianism. It is very easy for socialism to develop in a totalitarian way. If we look at Hannah Arendt and the way she spoke about totalitarianism in World War II or in Germany, we see that it's very much the same. One, socialism has a very strong tendency to use the media as its propaganda channels. The freedom in the media, the ability to be critical, have critical speech, stops. We can take the example of World War II. During the war in Germany, there was no freedom for the intellectuals to say anything apart from what Goebbels and the propaganda ministerium decided they were allowed to say. If they spoke up in any way that did not please the public narrative or the narrative of the government at the time, they were actually put in prison. Many of them ended up in the the different camps that we've heard so much about. There were not only Jews there, there were other people. The intellectuals were there, those that did speak up. So this tendency of changing a free media and forming it into becoming a propaganda channel is typical of socialism. Secondly, groupthink. All they do is structure everything into groupthink. You are welcome if you think and feel in a certain way and agree to what the state narrative tells you. So groupthink is a very strong thing too. Then there's the creation of fear in the population. What will happen to you if you don't agree with the state or with the governmental officials and what they say? And fourth, needless to say almost, there is practically no free speech. And let me add one more thing. Socialism derives from or is a part of Marxism, which is an atheist's ideology. It hates Christianity. It hates Western values. It hates the traditional historical values that formed the success of the Western world. So you will find that in any socialist state, which derives from the thinking and the writing of Karl Marx, of course, who hated Western values, you will find that his ideal and the socialist ideal is to crush the traditional Western values. And this is what I write a lot about in my book, The Billionaire World, and also in the book that addresses Trump, The Battle for America. So these issues are very important to understand, that when in the UK now and in Germany, which J.D. Vance pointed out, in the UK and in Germany, people go to jail over a small post in which they, in a mean way, criticize illegal immigration. So in the socialist state, we have started to, in Europe, to attack our own citizens, but mark you, we do not stop the illegal immigration. So this was one of the points he addressed. Let me just add one more point pertaining to how socialism works in the EU. We have a communist system of immense bureaucracy. These leaders, and mind you, the top leaders of the EU are not chosen by the people, for one. These leaders dictate, and the immense bureaucracy in the EU dictate towards the whole of Europe what European nations are allowed to do or not. And woe on them if they start to criticize illegal immigration, for example. Look at Hungary. What will happen to you then? So the system in Europe is far from free, and we are not like Kaja Kallas and some of these leaders in the EU say we are part of the free world. I don't know which part they are talking about, because we are not in any way free to express our thoughts in Europe. And no wonder the EU establishment were so angry when J.D. Vance held his conservative speech.
Yeah, I think, what really worries me is that Vance gave very specific examples of what he thought was the problem. And everybody can see those examples are true. And I actually haven't heard one European leader address those specific examples that he gave. To say that pray in silence before around an abortion clinic, it's right to arrest them or it's wrong to arrest them. Nobody commented that. They just started to badmouth the vice president for insulting them. And that, to me, is the response of people that have something to hide. You respond with being offended instead of actually answering to tell him, you're mistaken. So I think that there's a really deep shift in the States. But I want to ask you, Zuckerberg went on, I think it was Joe Rogan, and explained how the Biden regime harassed them to remove from Facebook truths, things they know were true, but they were criticizing the political narrative and the policies of the Biden regime. And Zuckerberg said he regretted, doing as they said, which is really, really scary. That in America, a big tech company like Facebook is bowing down to a regime that is closing down, shutting down free speech. And Elon Musk bought Twitter and opened X. And like we talked about in our Norwegian version, that he didn't shut out leftists. He just let conservatives come back on X. Now, just a few recent days, anyone that still has any positive thoughts about Trump is now labeled a Nazi from senior commentators in Europe. But the way the US perceives, even in CNN, there are people that acknowledges what went on under Biden, and they see America, 77 million people, the majority of the American people see the Trump presidency as a revival of freedom. But in Europe, it is proclaimed as new fascism, totalitarianism, and that Europe has the free platform, while saying that they will tighten free speech in 2026. So I think there's really, what scares me is that Europe and America is departing, but it's Europe that's going in the wrong way.
First of all, I would argue that I do not think that Europe is departing very far, because Europe is a vassal state. Maybe we could call Europe state number 51 to the United States. Where does Europe want to depart? It is the United States that is financing our defenses. Over 70% of NATO is financed from the United States. We have spent the past over 30 years turning down our defenses. We've been so proud having all these female defense ministers giggling and sitting around in meetings. The so-called soft power that Europe has been pushing for, which basically is to smile and to be kind and to put women in positions, and the DEI systems and woke ideology, and this kind of soft power in nations. I'm talking about the European nations that are not able to defend themselves. So where do they want to go if they want to depart from the United States? It's the United States that is defending us. It's utter stupidity to say something like that. Secondly, we spent the past years sending all our gear to Ukraine, now depleting our own systems, and it's been going up in smokes in the Ukraine, with such horrible fighting going on both sides. I see Americans reporting now that around 1 million dead and wounded on each side of that conflict. So where do we actually want to depart? I saw, it's a horrible situation, because the world is moving forward, but it looks like Europe is moving backwards. For example, the new EU top diplomat, Kaja Kallas. Who is that? She was a prime minister for 3 years or something of the sort in Estland. What is Estland? It's a Soviet country, my God. They came out of the Soviet Union just a few years ago. That's the type of person. She's a young somebody. She's put in the top diplomat position. And when you read actually what she writes, I think it was just a few days ago, I could even read it out for you here, so to get it completely correct, but you can read it yourself. She says, post the meeting of Zelensky and Trump. Now, this is the top diplomat in Europe. She says, we in Europe are all for Ukraine. That's fine enough. Then she goes on ahead to say that we now understand from the ill-fated meeting of Zelensky and Trump, we understand that we need a new leader in the free world. And we in Europe should take that position. Something like that is what she says. So one, she's saying that Europe, which doesn't even have its own defenses, should be a world leader. And she's trying to remove that world leader position from Trump and the United States, which is the nation that is defending Europe at this point. So when you have top diplomats speaking like this, and top diplomats that understand that little about what is really going on, still using the language of the free world, and that was the Biden administration's slogans, one wonders where Europe is actually going to go. We want to go somewhere without any sort of defense. You spoke about also Mark Zuckerberg. Let me just comment on that. I mean, it's since 2017, the shutting down of the freedom of the social media has been slowly put in place. 2017 and 18, that was established with fact checkers, and they outsourced. Zuckerberg explained that he outsourced the fact checking missions. So of course he's putting the blame on the fact checkers. Of course, Zuckerberg knows very well what the fact checkers did. They outrooted anything that was conservative, so that the globalists, socialism and globalism has gone hand in hand the past decades, actually, which we have seen. So the globalists who want the open borders, no check on illegal immigrants, because then you have a free workforce that doesn't have any rights. That's been part of the problem in the United States. The reason why they keep the illegal immigration going is that illegal immigrants don't have any rights. You can pay them a cent, to put it that way. And who are they going to complain to? You can have them in slave-like situations, working hotels and doing the dirty jobs, and you can give them any wage you want because they have nowhere to complain. So it's like putting in another workforce that doesn't have rights. It's very strange that true socialists are not protesting illegal immigration, because it's a new form of slavery, please remember. So at any rate, when we then got, or when Zuckerberg now says that he wants to stop the fact checking and bring in some more conservative viewpoints, okay, we'll see. We clearly see that Trump has done some deals, to put it that way. Whether this is going to be something that is actually going to work in Europe, or if we still are going to be under the boot of these totalitarian socialists that are ruling EU and ruling Europe. And to speak about Norway, I don't know, here it's really horrible. It's totally horrible and totally totalitarian shutdown of free speech. I hope those fact checkers are going to leave us alone as well. And please remember that when you have such a rigid system that doesn't allow free speech, no wonder, Eric, that people hate Trump. Because they don't understand in any way what he stands for. They don't understand that he attempts to stop the illegal immigration, to stop the new slave class, to help the working class families, to stop the outsourcing of wealth only to a small elite. This is what he wants to stop. And of course, when you have a media that doesn't explain any of this, they can create, just like they did during World War II. The Germans didn't know anything of what was actually happening. They only were told what the propaganda Nazi media told them. So we're actually in a similar system without understanding it.
I think you're pointing to the right thing. I mean, not only it's delusional what's going on in Europe. When they host a meeting in London and they say Europe is going to put boots on the ground in Ukraine, and then they turn around to Trump that they just snuffed out and say, you have to guarantee our security. It's like it's a show. It's a really, really Greek tragedy that you're looking at, and you wonder, do these people really know what they're doing? And the States is covering 70% of NATO's total costs. So we are fully dependent. There is no NATO without the US. There is no consistent European defense of anything. We've shut down our own defenses. If you remember back in 2016, everybody said Trump would destroy NATO. What he made happen was, for the first time since the end of the Cold War, he made European countries start prioritizing their defense budgets again. And if the threat of Russia is in the proportion that the European leaders today are claiming, then I wonder, why are we 3 years into a war and nothing has happened on strengthening the defense of our own nations? It's like a total collapse of logic. But I want to ask you this. I think what Trump is doing is obvious. The US has reached a debt ceiling, and they cover 70% of NATO. They cover more than 50%, 51.56% of the total UN budget. So when Trump sees the victims of fentanyl, an open border, veterans sleeping under bridges, and all of the other stuff, of course, he takes care of his people. He has to get the deficit down, and he starts cutting. And Europe reacts like a bunch of children that has been free riders for too long. And then they overcompensate with arrogance that is really going to destroy us. So where do you think this is heading? If I were Jonas Gahr Støre, I would go to DC and strengthen a strong bilateral relationship with Trump. Say, Norway, we are strategically important. We got oil, gas, fish, you name it. What can we do together? That's what I would do today.
The problem in Europe, and you're speaking about Norway, the problem in Europe is that we still have yesterday's leaders. We have yesterday's editors. We have editors in the largest newspapers and all over Europe that follow the 1968 socialist ideology. And that's like 70 years ago now, 60, 50 years old. And due to this socialist narrative, groupthink, they all mingle in the same groups. They all talk the same language. They all try to remain popular and be popular towards, to be invited to the same parties. And there's this very strong sense of groupthink in Europe. And this is the problem, because if you cannot read the map, you need to have a correct map in order to know where to go. And if your map is still the 1968 map, or let's say the 1989 map, we have still the map of when the Berlin Wall fell, and when Francis Fukuyama wrote so lovely that this was the end of history, that the democratic liberalism had won in history. And since that time, we have not looked so much into getting a strong defense. We have not gotten a strong defense. We have rather demoted our own defenses the past 30 years, when China and Russia and other nations have really put billions upon billions upon billions in building up their defenses. Europe has built down their defenses, maybe believing the socialist idea that there would be peace on earth and some utopia coming up instead of more wars. So I think that, one, we are victims of our own stupidity in demoting our own defenses. Secondly, we are very sly in Europe, because it's been very fine for us that the United States pays for everything, so that we can just relax and, have our soft power, because there's no such thing as soft power, There is only one. Power is power, and it is hard power. And why have we in Europe been able to speak about soft power? That is the power of women, the power of DEI, the power of the woke show. Why have we been able to speak so much about that? And now I think we almost only have women leaders. I highly doubt their competence. But these are the ones we have, Kaja Kallas and von der Leyen and these. So why have we been able to say we speak about soft power? Because the hard power, the United States, are the ones defending us. But the Ukraine war, of course, has changed this picture, and I think it has taken us by surprise in Europe. And now, obviously, we see our massive weaknesses, and we are just going to follow Trump whether we want to or not, because we are left completely defenseless if Russia attacks us in 2 days and we are not in union with the United States. How is that going to go about exactly? The UK have troops around 70,000. Russia has millions and millions. So you do the math.
No, they're delusional. The European leadership is totally delusional. And we started out with freedom of speech, which really it's the cornerstone of any free nation. The second is the Vance pointed out to the internal challenge, which is illegal immigration, and wir schaffen das, as Merkel said. Well, we really don't schaffen das. And we have seen the exploitation of white British girls by immigrant mafia structures, trafficking, rape, all of that. And we know now that people knew, police knew, but they didn't want to do anything with it because it were immigrants. We got people knifed. Talk with Jewish people in France. They will not even identify as Jews for sake of their life and their health. So this point is not either even recognized by European leaders. The idea of multiculturalism and cultural relativism, the idea that even now you're eating halal cheese in Norway and you never asked for it. So I talk with Arab leaders, Israelis, Americans, even in Africa. They are very concerned about the level of terrorism and violence that is going on internally of these immigrant-based problems that are created. We haven't seen many kids and women coming. We see a lot of males from 18 to 35, which is creating a very dangerous thing. Trump shut down the border now. He's been president for a month. It's more or less shut down, and he's deporting people, and he's creating safety in the streets of Americans. Do you think that Europe is at all capable of providing security for its people ever again?
Yes, I certainly do think so. It's just a question of having the correct leaders. If you have horrible, terrible leaders like the ones we have today, you get a horrible, terrible situation in Europe. If you get better leaders, you will get a better situation. And pertaining to what you're describing in the UK and the horrifying, I've written a lot about that at the Herland Report and in the US outlets as well. When you look at the horrifying examples, Rotherham, gang rape scandals and all of that, I would like to say too, I speak a lot about socialism and Marxism, yes, but it is a profound Marxist idea. It's actually one of their philosophers named Jacques Derrida, an Algerian guy. He was the one that first formed the idea and wrote about it, many books about, formed the idea that power structures always come in pairs. For example, the male versus the female. For example, the European versus the non-Western immigrant, for example. And one party in the pair is always the strong one, and the other one is always the weak. For example, the male is always the strong, the female is always the weak. So our whole feminism and our whole multiculturalism is based on the idea that you should always feel sorry for the weak link. And How racist is that, by the way? And the weak link defined by the socialists are the dark-skinned individuals. It reminds you of Germany during World War II. What was it that characterized the socialism in Germany? Please, during World War II, please remember that Germany was a socialist state during World War II. The Nazi government is an abbreviation for National Socialist Labour Party. It was a national socialism. What did they do? They picked one particular ethnic group and wanted to get rid of one particular ethnic group, as if it's possible to say that anyone with white skin, for example, is always the perpetrator, or anyone with black skin is always the perpetrator, as if right and wrong corresponds with somebody's skin color. Seriously? And this is what we have implemented in Europe under socialism post-World War, and especially after the 1960s. This is what keeps Keir Starmer making so many mistakes. He is very afraid of criticizing non-Western immigrants. Why? Because they have darker skin. Because he learned in his philosophy, in his Marxism, that one should never criticize them. So it doesn't matter how many they rape, because they have the victim card. They have the chronic victim card. They should always be excused. And this is how we have come to the situation we find ourselves in Europe right now, that it doesn't matter how many white British girls are raped because of their skin color. And since they are native British and they are the indigenous people in the UK, precisely because of that, one should not support them, but always excuse the immigrant. So this is the weakness in the system, and it's a sad situation to see that it has actually come to this. But it needs to change. We need to have a change in paradigm and change in narrative, so that the European nations begin to support their own population and defend their own nations against criminals. And illegal immigrants are criminals. They are breaking the law, and they should be returned to the countries from where they came. If they want to apply for a visa, they can apply in a proper way. So this is the change that needs to come in Europe, that we actually say goodbye to our yesterday leaders and get leaders in place that are willing to stand up for the European population and defend their rights in their own nations. And I do think there's a high chance that this will come to Europe, because, as I said initially, Europe has become such a vassal state of the United States. So whatever the United States decides is what is eventually going to come to Europe.
So we are starting to detecting a pattern here of the current situation in Europe. We are looking at a lack of freedom of speech, which is deliberate by the European elites. And we are now looking into that we don't feel equal before the law anymore. In Europe, color of skin has started to define how the law approaches whatever happens. Now, this is exactly what Vance was looking at. This is exactly what Trump wants to correct. And we need leaders in Europe that actually goes the same way. Now, the third issue that I see pretty significant here is Trump talks about the green scam. Because what is a reality is that this climate, I call it psychosis, or I will be neutral, the climate policies of Norway and Europe is deindustrializing Europe. It will break financial crisis. It will deindustrialize us. Our kids and grandchildren will not have jobs. And at the same time, we are going to need a lot of money to strengthen our defenses quickly and put a lot of money into to this deportation issue that we need to look at illegal immigrants. So how do you see again, I like your optimism, but how are we going to get Germany, France, and UK to snap out of this messiah complex of saving the world from carbon dioxide? And how are we going to get to Norway to invest in industries that can make money to the nation and not just tap out our pension fund?
Let me start by saying it's such paradox when some now say that for Trump to appoint into his government system and the DOD in the United States Elon Musk, who's a billionaire, such a horrible thing. But we have had left-wing billionaires controlling us for decades now, and nobody has complained about that, have they? We have had George Soros tapping into USAID, extracting billions, and then funneling this money into starting revolutions in different countries, funneling it into the green agenda, like you're saying, and pushing for, I would argue, misanthropic agenda towards the West. Wait, you're speaking about the green agenda. There's no other nations are talking about green agenda except for the Western nations. When you go to Russia, there's no talk of green agenda. You think China is talking about green agenda? They have opened up coal mines as though there's no tomorrow. Africa, nobody even know what a green agenda is. You go to South America, the only place that has been attacked and demanded from to start a green agenda is Europe and the United States. And the United States long ago abandoned that. They have their fracking, they have their oil, they're fracking like there's no tomorrow. They're self-sufficient. So in other words, it's Europe that is going down due to the green agenda. And so much of that agenda is paid for by these NGOs that are controlled by so-called left-wing George Soros and others. What is the green agenda? It is that we should stop using fossil fuels. But we do not have a substitute energy source that is strong enough for fossil fuels. This is something that George Soros knows very well. So when you push these green girls that now have the power, for example, in Germany, latte drinking green girls that know nothing about real power source of the world, they will say, let us cut down the fossil fuels, let's cut down all the energy use that we do. What will be the end result of that? We are regressing back to the 1800s. So we do not want electricity anymore. That is powered by fossil fuels. We do not want tarmac on our roads. That's fossil fuels. We do not want emballage for all the stuff that we eat and drink and our groceries. It's emballaged by plastic, which is fossil fuels. We have so many of our clothes, of our furniture, our lamps. There's fossil fuels in absolutely everything now. So in other words, what we are actually saying is we want to shut down our energy source and our welfare and our high level of living standard. We will shut that down and return to 1880 before we even have a good enough alternative to fossil fuels. So again, you see how when left-wing billionaires own the newspapers, when they push for a green agenda so that all that we see in the newspapers talks about the green agenda, you have the young generation that are not old enough to understand that they're being fooled. So then you get political parties that go straight into this. And in the end, if they succeed, we will have a situation. So pertaining to the need to stop the fossil fuels, the next question probably is, who is it that wants to see the downfall of Europe? Who is it that have wanted to see the downfall of Germany? We live in an age where we see the downfall of the strongest industrial state in Europe due to the green agenda. We see the United Kingdom with an almost communist system and leadership through the Labour government of Keir Starmer that are shutting down their own source of energy, namely their oil and gas sector. And they are imported LNG from the United States instead, and gas from Norway, so that it looks like the UK is meeting the standards for the Paris Agreement. What is actually happening is that they are buying LNG, and the whole of Europe is buying LNG to a much, much, much higher price than if we had our own sources, such as the UK could have had. They're completely shutting down their own oil and gas resources, the United Kingdom. So again, we have yesterday's leaders. We need to get leaders that look ahead, that look for tomorrow, and that will rebuild Europe and strengthen Europe and bring our defenses up to speed so that we can defend ourselves and do not need to depend on the United States the way we have done up to this point.
Because the United States wants to have a more balanced friendship. It's good for America and it's good for us to take responsibility for our own nations. But I know we know the answer with media and everything, but it amazes me how utter stupidity can get the grasp of majority of people. It's like, don't they see what's going on? Don't they see? I saw some videos here just the other day from the UK, from English streets. You know, it was safe. It was there were two genders. I mean, you know how maybe a little romantic version of UK, and you see what is happening now, where it's a total different nation. And I wonder, are they able to come back? I see serious commentators in the US. They are now using Europe as an example, warning of what must not happen in the States. And it baffles me that Europeans are so stuck in this narrative, whether they don't see. Even I talk with people that are educated, they have good jobs, they have a lot of money, and they really feel that, no, we are good with fact checkers. It's called censorship. It is censorship. They are good with the EU in 2026, tightening freedom of expression. They really don't care about all the violence going on in Europe by illegal immigrants, because it hasn't happened to them yet. And they don't really, they buy their Tesla or electrical car, and it seems we are industrializing ourselves, and we need money. It's shocking to me that people can slide into this illusion. But hopefully podcasts like this can maybe give them something to think about and wake them, shake them a little bit up. But I want to ask you, what do you think? I think that Trump's idea, I mean, in my view, the craziest things done since the Second World War was Bush going to NATO summit in Bucharest in 2008 and talking about NATO in Ukraine, in Georgia. It's like, that's also to me, where does this come from? It's the Ukraine crisis is to me like the Cuba crisis. It could have escalated into a global nuclear war. Luckily, we had Kennedy in the States and Khrushchev. They talked. They played tough guys, then they talked, they pulled out, and we got peace for another decades. But I mean, is it so unreasonable to understand that Russia doesn't want missiles 7 minutes from Moscow?
I watched an interview by Sir Alex Younger. He is one of the leaders. He used to be a leader for the M16 in the UK. And I think he was quite to the point when he said that we are in a way turning back to the Yalta Conference of 1945. There's been so many international bodies that have discussed, and so many actors in the geopolitical playground, and so much mess, frankly, since the West and its unipolarism clearly is failing. There's a big mess on the scene, and he says that he thinks that we are returning to a time where the strong powers and the strong men actually sit down and decide. And in his suggestion, the strong men of our age are Trump, it is Putin, and it is Xi Jinping in China. But of course, after World War II at the Yalta Conference, it was Great Britain, US, and Russia. So the China element has come into the situation, or the analysis, and so I think it's inevitable that Europe, which is not even invited to have a seat at these types of discussions, because we only represent, the weak power. Frankly, we're the vassal state. Why invite the vassal state? We don't even have our own defenses, as mentioned before. So first of all, we need to get our own defenses. We need to change our leaders so that we have leaders of tomorrow that actually care about the people that they are serving, instead of and care about law and order, and re-implement law and order into Europe. And I think there are hopes, frankly. I mean, you look to Italy, Meloni, she has a few things to say. There's politicians all over Europe that belong to other elements than the Marxists. Please remember that the Marxists and socialists are the ones ruling Europe today. You were mentioning also, Erik, that you speak to people that have a high education. What does that help you? When I started my education at the University of Oslo, for example, I can just tell the story very briefly. I began noticing, because I was interested in some of the right-wing philosophers, André Glucksmann, for example, and Bernard-Henri Lévy, two Frenchmen, who moved away from Marxism and became very critical to Marxism. And I wanted to read their work. Then I noticed that their work was not published in Norway, and not in any way at the university. It wasn't present at all. I started finding out that the only literature that we in the social sciences, history, anthropology, those kinds of, the only literature that was available was the literature written by the neo-Marxists of the 1960s. So let's say somebody becomes a professor at the University of whatever, Oslo, and all he has ever read is the literature that the neo-Marxists wrote in the 60s and 70s. No wonder his education, I mean, what kind of an education is that? He has been indoctrinated for 20 years, yes. He will be able to speak very eloquently about the indoctrination that he has gone through, but he doesn't have any common sense. So again, back to the map and how to read the map. If your map is an ideological map that fit the 1960s, what are you going to do with that map when reality and common sense is 2025? So this is the problem we have. We need completely new leaders to help us move forward in Europe. Now, the question is, are we going to get these or not? The future will show.
I think that any country has the right to self-defense. I think that's like a foundation. But what I don't understand is Europe's totally lack of will to understand real politics. We've talked about lack of freedom of expression. We have talked about lack of acknowledging what's happening on illegal immigration. We have talked about the green scam that won't talk about, like it's real. The reality of life is like they try to define a reality that doesn't exist and then run politics on that basis. And change has to come. But I know we need to start to think about closing. And I got one maybe final thought. Everybody, I saw one of the guys that is challenging me very much, says that Trump is a fascist, almost a Nazi. Actually, the potential of Trump to become a Hitler was stated explicitly. Now he talks about he's defending liberty, freedom, etc., etc. And then you have guys like me that say Trump is actually defending freedom and liberty. And we need to understand that that the US cannot be our uncle with money anymore in Europe. They want to be respected. They don't want to be taken for granted. They don't have endless lot of money. They have to save America financially, and we have to be a constructive partner in that, and we have to maintain a strong relationship between Europe and the States. But do you think it is at all possible to have a civilized conversation about these issues moving forward?
Yes, I certainly think so, because power talks, and it's not weak power or soft power that talks the highest, it's hard power. So whatever comes out of the United States, who are the ones that are defending us anyway, and controlling us in so many ways, which we have allowed as well to be weakened in the way we have, it's inevitable that there's going to come some more sense into the European segment as well. And I would also argue that, again, you said all these horrible words that are coming out of the left, and we're so used to it in Europe. I mean, the second you say something in a newspaper or write something or say something in a show like this or whatever, or an interview, that goes contrary to the socialist Marxist narrative in that particular European country, instantly you have all these labels, whatever, homophobe, Islamophobe, whatever, racist, all of this. And I would like to point out that Lenin, one of the early socialists and the father of, well, at least Russian communism, the whole group around him, they really developed this into, and they specified it even in the 60s, in this the neo-Marxist revolution in the 60s, the need to repress the freedom for those we do not like. And who was it that they didn't like? Conservatives, people that did not agree with them. And Marcuse, for example, even wrote a book about it, how to repress those and deny freedom of speech to the groups that we do not like. And Lenin wrote about, we need to call them by all kinds of foul names, lie about them, say things that are offend them, say things that are completely wrong. Just find any horrible, slanderous word and slap it on them. This is the defined Marxist socialist tactic. When you look at the conservative side of things and the historical values, remember how we used to say sir and man, and how it used to be required for us to respect one another. When you look at the conservative side and traditional side in politics, it was important that we all dressed well, that we spoke kindly to one another, that we were polite. We could have the harshest debates, but we respected one another. So that's a whole other way of dealing with these issues. And I think that is also one of the elements we need to return to, is to reestablish how we speak to one another politely. We can harshly disagree, but we are rational and intelligent in the way we speak to one another. That needs to be re-implemented in the West as well, because free speech was never the right to be rude to anyone.
Last question, Hanne. Do you think peace in Ukraine is possible, or is it going to escalate? What's your consideration there?
We shall see, but I shall simply say that we shall see what the strong man with the power of defense and the strong warriors of our nations or of the continent is going to decide, like Sir Alex Younger said. The strong men are going to decide this, and for certain, I hope that we will be able to have peace. I am appalled at the way that Europeans are so fine with young Russians and young Ukrainians dying in the battlefields, with all the families losing their sons, and we're fine with that. And I would like to add that being fine with somebody else's children dying is a very mean thing to do, and we should stop the war. There should come an end to the war, and we should get peace on European soil again, and we should only have leaders that are interested in peace. When we are considering the horrifying suffering that's been ongoing now for years in the Ukraine, and I would argue too, it's been a political war. It's been political leaders that wanted this war to move NATO eastward. It's been pushed for such a long time. And I would probably end by saying that I agree very much with former NATO leader Jens Stoltenberg, because he recently said at the conference in Oslo that when he had his first lunch with Trump a number of years ago, Trump lined up for him the things that needed to be done in Europe. And Stoltenberg today acknowledged that Trump was right. I didn't think that at the time, but I see that now. He was right in every aspect of what we were discussing at that lunch at that time, Stoltenberg said. So I do think that the European leaders will listen whether they want to or not. And if we want to continue to have a great Europe, a Europe that can include prosperous nations, we certainly need to listen.
Thank you so much.
There we go,
Yeah.
Tom. That was a good ending. We need a strong Europe. We need self-confidence. We need to sharpen our objectives. We need to build strong economies. We need to build strong defenses. We need equality before the law. And we need freedom of speech. And we need America as balanced friends. Thank you, Hanne. Tom, over to you.
I was just going to ask you as a last questions, how do we defeat the socialism in Europe and EU, Norway especially? And you guys just answered it with the last comment. So thank you so much for a great podcast.